Americans are feeling as badly about the economy as they did during the height of COVID. This is the fifth consecutive month of consumer confidence declines, dropping 8 points, and it's the lowest level in 5 years. And what really dragged down consumer confidence in the month of April was people's expectations about the future hitting a 13-year low. Here's what people were concerned about: the business outlook, their income, what that's going to look like, fewer jobs available, concerns about recessions hitting a 2-year high in terms of concern level, also concerns about the stock market. And in this consumer confidence report that is put out by the Conference Board, there's actually a write-in section where Americans can write in sort of their top concerns. The top concern was tariffs, and that has reached an all-time high in terms of tracking that concern over the last several months. Also, I thought what was interesting in this report, Pamela, was that in the month of March, in this report, it detailed that consumers were making big purchases: cars, appliances, electronics. But not the case in April. Now it indicates that consumers are pulling back on these big ticket item purchases. Of course, that lines up, that tracks with the fact that the higher tariffs went into place in April. Also, this consumer confidence report really tracks with what we've seen with consumer sentiment and our own CNN polling that says that Americans, 52%, so the majority, are dissatisfied with the economy. It'll be critical to watch these reports in the next couple months as these tariffs really steep into prices, just how low people will feel about the economy.
To you, Matt, the economy was the reason Donald Trump was elected. He promised to improve it on day one. He promised to bring down the cost of living. Instead, he launched this global trade war, and the stock market has been slammed. Just take us through the economic concerns after 100 days of Donald Trump.
Yeah, Linda, it really does seem like both Wall Street and Main Street are giving two thumbs down to the Trump agenda. As you and Betsy were just talking about, the U.S. market on track for its worst 100-day start to any presidential term since 1974. Of course, that was under Gerald Ford after the resignation of Richard Nixon during Watergate, and that was during the great stagflation crisis. So that is quite telling right there. But also on the Main Street front, we just got new numbers in on consumer confidence showing that U.S. consumer confidence plunged in April to the lowest level since May of 2020. Think about that for a moment, right? That, of course, was during the COVID-19 crisis. And the latest CNN polling does speak to a lot of doom and gloom on Main Street, seeing that 69%, more than 2/3 of adults, say that a U.S. recession is likely in the next year. Only 30% say it's unlikely. And yes, some of this pessimism is being driven by Democrats, but it's not just Democrats. This CNN poll found that 39% of people who voted for President Trump just a few months ago, they also think that a recession in the next year is very or somewhat likely. And look, there is a risk in an economy that is driven by consumer spending. There's a risk that all of this pessimism ends up making a recession a self-fulfilling prophecy, where people decide to save more money and spend less. Maybe they decide to not go on vacation, not buy a car, not go out to eat. You could have a situation where there's a negative feedback loop where confidence drops and spending falls, forcing companies to lay off workers. That would cause more market trouble and also lower confidence. It can be a tough thing to get out of. Now, none of this means that a recession is inevitable. It's not, right? It's entirely possible that people are telling pollsters that they hate the economy and they're going to keep spending anyway. That's what we saw 3 years ago. Still, though, I did talk to David Kelly over at JP Morgan, and he told me that he does think that at least a shallow recession is likely for the United States unless there's a dramatic reversal from the president on tariffs. And Linda, if there were a dramatic reversal, that would just feed this policy whiplash that has really confused CEOs, small business owners, investors, and yes, consumers.
And it certainly doesn't help that a majority of Americans think a recession is likely. But Matt, I want to ask you about particular companies. Amazon right now planning potentially to highlight the price rise on products thanks to Trump's tariffs. And from what we heard from his press secretary today, he sounds like he's pretty upset about that prospect.
Yeah, it was really startling to hear how forcefully the White House this morning attacked Amazon over what was a reported move over displaying tariffs on the website. Take a listen to the White House press secretary earlier.
About Amazon's announcement. This is a hostile and political act by Amazon. Why didn't Amazon do this when the Biden administration hiked inflation to the highest level in 40 years? And I would also add that it's not a surprise because, as Reuters recently wrote, this is another reason why Americans should buy American. It's another reason why we are onshoring critical supply chains here at home to shore up our own critical supply chain and boost our own manufacturing here.
Now, in just the last few moments, we have heard from Amazon clarifying what's going on here. Now, in a statement to CNN, an Amazon spokesperson says that the team that runs our ultra low cost Amazon Haul store has considered the idea of listing import charges on certain products. Teams discuss ideas all the time. This was never a consideration for the main Amazon site, and nothing has been implemented on any Amazon property. So in case you're not familiar, Amazon Haul is the competitor that Amazon has to Shein and Temu. And the company is clarifying that, yes, this is something that they considered. It hasn't actually happened yet. But I do think that this forceful response from the White House does show how sensitive U.S. officials are about anything that would, A, increase prices, or B, cast any sort of blame for those increased prices.
Well, I want to take a closer look at the economy under President Trump. CNN global economic analyst Rana Foroohar joins us from New York. She's also a global business columnist and associate editor at the Financial Times. Good to see you, Rana.
Great to see you.
So I want to start, obviously, on just the overall picture of the economy in the U.S. after 100 days of Donald Trump in his second term. We know that it's certainly the worst period for the stock market in at least 50 years when you compare this period of time to other presidents. How would you sum it up?
Well, I would just say that this president inherited the strongest post-COVID recovery in the rich world. And he has, in 100 days, created chaos, uncertainty, and an economy that is, by most estimates, between 70 and 90% likely to go into recession within Q2 or Q3 of this year. A lot could change between now and the fall. I expect that there's going to be much more rollback of proposed tariff rates. But, I would say that a lot of the damage has been done in terms of just creating uncertainty. If there is one thing that is good for the economy, it's certainty. You just don't have that in this administration. People don't understand if they can trust today's statements. They might not be true tomorrow or in a month or 3 months. The president sees that as a negotiating tactic and something that he really stands by. But I think there is going to be a big fallout, a long-term fallout. You can see it in the bond market, actually, which is saying, we think that the U.S. is riskier than it has been. We think that there should be a higher charge for risk premiums for investing in the U.S. None of that is good for the economy.
And of course, Rana, when you look at the polls, it shows that 69% of Americans believe that a recession is now likely. Obviously, that's a bad sign, but 59% said that Trump has made the economy worse. And a report out just an hour ago on consumer confidence shows that it's at its lowest level since the 2020 pandemic. What does all of this mean for the chance of a recession?
Well, very high, because if you think about America's economy, it's 70% consumer spending. So when consumers start to zip up their wallets, that is a huge hit. Now, add to that the threat of tariffs, the inflation that could come from that, and then the slower growth, and you really have a toxic brew. The number of companies on earnings calls just in the last few days and weeks that have been using the word recession is exponentially higher than it was at the end of last year. And at the same time, we know that growth is slowing. We know inflation seems to be going higher. That brings up the word stagflation. The last time we heard that was in the 70s. It's a word that nobody wants to hear.
Yeah, exactly. We did hear from the Republican strategist, Karl Rove. I just want to play some sound.
When it gets to the economy, he is in very bad shape. And it's not only that he's in the short term in bad shape, there's also evidence in the poll that no matter, even if he gets his way on certain things like tariffs, that he's not good in the long run.
I mean, that's part of the problem, right? He's using these tariffs as a negotiating tool, but we're still not at any sense of a deal with any of these countries. So what does that mean in the long term?
Well, you heard Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, on a pretty substantial press conference earlier today, and there just wasn't a lot to report. I mean, he was saying we're making good progress with partners like India or Japan. We don't see deals yet. We certainly don't see them with China, which has rebuffed efforts by the Trump administration to have lower level negotiations. The Chinese really want to deal with the president himself, and I can't blame them because we've seen situations in which the USTR, Jameson Greer, is saying one thing in front of Congress while the president is saying another thing about trade and tariffs. So very, very confusing times. I think that, again, this is going to be weeks and months of this. I think we really have to strap in for volatility that we haven't seen in decades, really.
Yeah. All right, Rana Foroohar, always great to get your analysis. Thanks so much.